Greatly overpriced, disappointing story. Today I'm looking at issues 1, 2, and 3 of G.O.D.S. by Jonathan Hickman and Valerio Schiti. They teased the heck out of this story in practically every Marvel comic for months. They would have little inserts at the end of the comics so that they knew every single person who reads Marvel comics knew about this series. And this is the first big thing that Jonathan Hickman has done since his whole X-Men thing. So even though I'm not a huge fan of the mystical sorcery side of Marvel comics, I was really excited for it because I love Jonathan Hickman's writing. What I really love about Hickman's writing in general is that he seems to be really good at reducing things to their purest nature. He gets rid of tropes and the patterns we try to put on life and the pageantry that goes into this whole human experience thing. He just gets to the bare truth of an idea that hits you right in your soul where you know it is true, and then he builds from there. Which is why his previous work on things like Fantastic Four and New Avengers and Manhattan Projects all hit so hard is because you know exactly what the stakes are. You can feel the stakes of those stories in your bones. And when it comes to this series, I don't feel that way. And most of the problems that I have with this series so far are in this giant 64-page issue 1 that I paid $10 for. And look, I'm not saying it's impossible for Marvel to publish a $10 64-page comic that I love, but this ain't it, and here's why. We've got the exact same 3 pages at the very beginning of the book and at the very end of the book, and by the time you get to the end of the book, those same 3 pages don't hit any differently. It's not like you got some revelation halfway through and now what they said in those first 3 pages means something different to you. It's just the same thing over again. We've got this really drawn-out scene between the 2 main characters that's supposed to be deeply emotional and kind of heartbreaking, but we haven't learned to care about these characters yet, and the whole conversation feels like it could have been summarized in like maybe 1 page, or even just referenced later in the other issues, and then it would have had more weight to it. What that scene ends up being is just a whole lot of exposition, and it's all about these abstract forces that have existed in the Marvel Universe for a while, but are so abstract that we don't use them very often. Specifically, I'm talking about the natural order of things and the orders that be, which are beings that exist in the Marvel Universe. They're just like abstract group consciousness god things. You know, they're a lot like order and chaos or the living tribunal, these concepts that you wouldn't really be familiar with unless you're into that cosmic stuff like Silver Surfer and Warlock, which I'm not into, so I don't have a very good frame of reference for it. And after reading the first issue and even the second and third issues, I'm still not sure how those 2 beings factor into the story at all. I don't know why they matter, and I don't know what they want. Meanwhile, this main character that we're following around, Winn, is just a more cynical version of Doctor Strange who's been around for a really long time. I would say I don't like the character, but I don't really care about him enough to dislike him. I'm just not interested in him at all. I think he's kind of smarmy and trite and overly jaded, and whenever he tries to be clever, it's just kind of boring. The other main character, Aiko, is actually pretty interesting. I like her a lot, but in issues 2 and 3, she kind of becomes just a typical Hickman character who is entirely exposition and not much actual character. As far as the plot of the first issue goes, there's all this build up to this eventual conflict between Earth's heroes and this new character who's a proto-mage, Kubik's Core, and he's pretty cool. I'm still a little bit fuzzy on exactly what it is that he wants, but I'm pretty sure that Earth's heroes succeed in stopping him. I think. What really annoys me about this section is that we have all these super smart characters that we're familiar with show up to fight this battle, like Black Panther and Mr. Fantastic and Amadeus Cho, but they do practically next to nothing. So all these characters that we would be familiar with and could latch onto in this story that's full of all these things that are so abstract and unfamiliar, we don't get to see them do anything. And also, just randomly, there's 1 panel that shows Doctor Doom there fighting the good fight with them. That seems like kind of a big deal to involve Doctor Doom in this fight for Earth, especially as just a throwaway in 1 panel. He didn't even have any lines. So what looks like it should be like an earth-shattering event that the whole Marvel Universe knows about really ends up being downplayed and left to all these characters that we just met, and it's honestly just not that satisfying. There's definitely some cool world building going on outside of all the action. It has a similar taste of creativity to it as Jason Aaron's Doctor Strange run, but Hickman's dialogue in this issue just feels overdone and not as meaningful as it normally is. Normally, if Hickman has a character talk, they're saying something that matters. But a lot of the time in this issue, they say things just to be talking, and it's not fun to read. So I think overall, Jason Aaron's Doctor Strange series was better because the dialogue was a lot more concise. And then at the very end, we have what looks like it's supposed to be a scene where we're separating the main character Winn from Doctor Strange, because Winn is kind of a Doctor Strange ripoff, and it looks like he wants to drive home the point that they are not the same character by having Winn do this long long, edgy speech about how everything is pointless and it doesn't matter what you do because the forces of evil are going to succeed anyway. And for a second there, I believed him, and I thought maybe the tone of this series was going to be kind of dark, and I got a little excited. And then the very next page, he gets kissed by his ex-wife, and then he's like, oh, you know what, maybe things are fine. Do you know how much faith I had in this series after reading the first issue? Like, none. However, issue 2 was much better. Honestly, I would like this series so much more if they had just started with issue 2, because it's just way more accessible. It follows this really smart character who, like, stumbles into this new world of magic, and we get to experience this world of magic for the first time with her, which is way easier than this massive plot dump from issue 1. This is a Marvel comic that builds on what you know and takes you somewhere new and colorful. And I really like this new character that we're introduced to in issue 2. She's really smart, she's talented, she's naturally gifted, and she's very determined to make her own way in the world and not accept any handouts, but do it herself. And I like that a lot, so issue 2 was way more enjoyable than issue 1. Issue 3 was kind of a mix. It had some really cool stuff with this Cassandra character that they introduced. I liked that stuff. I didn't love the stuff they have with Oblivion, who's another conceptual being like order and chaos and the powers that be, all that stuff. So issue 3 was kind of like a mix between issue 1 and issue 2. It's got lots of high concept stuff, but it's also sort of accessible. It is wordy. There are lots of parts in this issue that are too wordy. And listen, I like wordy sometimes. I like nice, thick dialogue so that we can really dig into who these characters are and what's happening in their lives and what it means to them. But this feels like dialogue for the sake of impressing you. It's entirely abstract concepts that don't have any immediate impact on what's going on in the story. So like I said, I liked this character Cassandra they're using in this issue, but that's really the only redeeming factor of the issue for me. There were some moments where the dialogue was charming and witty and even fun, but there were more moments where the dialogue was unnecessary. So as far as the writing goes on G.O.D.S, the parts I like the most are the parts where it is decidedly uncharacteristic Jonathan Hickman writing, which is pretty disappointing for a Hickman fan like myself. I've liked Valerio Schiti's art for quite a while. I think the first time I saw his art was Miles Morales' first Ultimate Spider-Man run, and it is really solid. It's great character work. The perspectives that he chooses to draw subjects from is really great. The composition of his panels is often very impressive, but I'm just not quite getting the sense that this is his best work. I've seen some other people online say that the character design is really well done in this book, and I just can't agree. Some of the characters do look very unique, but I wouldn't say that they look special. I don't love Wynn's giant red trench coat. I just don't like it. I think Wynn's sidekick Dimitri is honestly pretty boring to look at. And man, Aiko is a great character, but her bangs going right across her forehead in the least flattering way just looks kind of silly. There are a lot of like fantasy critters like vampires and talking frogs and things like that throughout the series, and those are drawn very well. They're not going to stick out as some of the best drawings of that material I've ever seen, but they're done well. I don't love Matheus Manhanini's covers. I think the aesthetic is fine. It's not my favorite aesthetic, but it is a very solid aesthetic. The problem I have is that the characters on the covers do not always look like the characters on the interior, especially on issue 3. That is not what Oblivion looks like. It's an entirely different skull. I'm pretty sure that this is the human form of Oblivion, but this guy looks like 30 years younger than he does inside the comic, and I don't even know who that is. Might be Dimitri. I think it's supposed to be Dimitri. Looks like a random dude with no personal characteristics to me. But you know, pretty colors. Looks different than most other stuff on the stands. It definitely stands out. So overall, I'm just a little disappointed in this series. I'm not very excited about where it's going. I have no idea where it's going. I don't know what I should expect from it. I'm not even clear on what the characters want. Yeah, it's just not that great. I think it's supposed to be some triumphant new corner of the Marvel universe that we haven't seen before, and Hickman is supposed to be expanding the boundaries of what is Marvel. But it's just not going very well. So I'm going to rate G.O.D.S based on the first 3 issues, overall, a 6 out of 10. It's really just not my cup of tea. It's like if I ordered a cup of tea and they sent me like a bucket with warm water and a maple leaf in it. That's not tea. So there you have it, folks. It isn't tea.